Till now, the first 13 verses of the text were spoken by the Guru Adi Shankaracharya. As you are aware that he had few disciples following him, actually 14 disciples. So from verses 14 to 28, these 14 verses are attributed to each disciple. So having heard the invaluable message from the Guru, each student, as it were, offers this verse as their understanding of their wisdom, as an offering to the Guru. So the next set of these verses are known as Chaturdasha Manjarika Stotra. Chaturdasha, Chatur is 4, Dasha is 10. So Chaturdasha refers to the 14. Manjarika Stotra means a bouquet of flowers. So a 14 bouquet of flowers, or a bouquet of 14 flowers. So this verse starts with the first disciple. But however it be, as a spiritual seeker, it really shouldn't matter to us, because the message there is quite apt, is quite intense, and it's quite relevant for a sadhana. So it is just a matter of information. Okay, with that in mind, let's chant verse 14 twice together. Jatilo mundi lunchita keshaha kashayam dhara bahukruta veshaha pashyannapi chana pashyati mudho chudara nimittam bahukruta veshaha. Jatilo mundi lunchita keshaha kashayam dhara bahukruta veshaha pashyannapi chana pashyati mudho chudara nimittam bahukruta veshaha. Very, very famous verse, oft quoted, often mentioned in the spiritual parlance. Now, the verse has been given the title as Abuse of Outward Symbols. We shall see what that means. So the translation reads, one with matted locks, one with head shaven, Jatilaha, which is matted locks, Mundi, with head shaven, Lunchita Keshaha, one with hair pulled out one by one, Kashayam Dhara, Bahukruta Veshaha, one dressed variously in the ochre robes, Pashyannapi Chana Pashyati Mudaha, even though he sees, but he sees not. The word Pashyati is a very beautiful word. That Pashyati, seeing, perception here, we are not talking about the physical perception. Here we are talking about the spiritual perception. The perception symbolized by the third eye of Lord Shiva. So when you and I put a tilak on our forehead, it is to remind us that we need to gain that divine perception. We need to gain that perception, to see the truth, to see the divinity, to see through that eye of wisdom, not through the gross, fleshy dolayas, as we call the physical eyes, not merely to see through them, but to see through the eye of wisdom. So these people lack that. So even though these people wear matted locks, some with head shaven, some with hair pulled out one by one, with the upper robes, even though they see not. Indeed, all this very disguise is for the sake of the belly. Kashayambara Bahukruta all this very disguise is only implication is they are trying to cover up something. They are trying to conceal something. They are not trying to allow your real nature to speak out, to express out, to show itself. Kashayambara Bahukruta So the abuse of outward symbols. So if you can look at that PowerPoint, it's just try to convey what the verse perhaps is saying, you know. So you find all sorts of people putting on an act. Now, first and foremost, this verse is not to be used as a measuring tool to judge others. So please don't start sitting in judgment of people. First of all, you should never judge others. The second is never ever attempt in judging people who are above your capacity, above your level. Because there's a very fair chance you will not understand them correctly. Hey, how is the audio for all of you? Is it clear? Okay. All right. Now, it could be because of I'm using this wireless earpod, so let me make it through the wire. Give me a minute. I'll have to disconnect. I'll have to be back to the connection just a minute. How is it now? Better than before? Okay. Glad. See, I wish you all give a feedback after the chanting. So what happens is if there is any concern, we can address it rather than making these adjustments after the class. But that's glad you told me at least now instead of struggling through the session. So as I was saying, when we read this verse, it perhaps would put us on a seemingly vantage point. You believe that you don't belong to this category because you are not wearing ochre robes. I may say to myself, oh, I am also not wearing ochre robes, so perhaps I don't belong to this category. So it is not that you and I are excluded just because you're not wearing an ochre robe. So please remember, every individual would fall under this category, and it's for you to find out whether you belong to this category or not. means there's a chance you could slip into this category. It's for you to find out whether you belong to it or not. And as I mentioned, it is not to judge others, and also never make the mistake of judging someone who is far beyond your capacities, far beyond your level. And thirdly, do not ever judge a person by their outward acts. Do not judge a person by the exterior. As they say, don't judge the book by the cover. You would not know what the truth is. Now, since many people only look at the outer exterior, there are these section of people who are abusing these outward symbols. Now, why do people do this? Because people still have a great reverence and regard for the mere symbol, the outward symbol of spirituality. So today, the moment someone wears a robe, you automatically have a certain amount of respect. He gathers an amount of regard. The sheer garb attracts attention. So here are those people who in fact are spiritual hypocrites. They take to spirituality with the only objective of satisfying their belly. Belly here symbolizes their selfish interests, their desires. They are just adopting spirituality as a means to satisfy the desires. These people are pseudo-sannyasis. These people are false renunciates. They are not those who are endowed with the true spirit of renunciation. You could call them pseudo-sannyasis, false renunciates. These are the impersonators of religion. The impersonators who put on a show of religiosity. They put on a show of religiosity. Now, what is wrong? You may say, sir, what is wrong in doing this? Sir, people adopt a spiritual path for a certain purpose. You adopt certain spiritual practices for a certain objective in mind. But when you use it for another purpose intended than what it is meant for, it is known as abuse. Isn't it? When somebody does something to you and you don't use it for the purpose it was intended, but you use it for something else, it is called abuse. Now, what is the biggest drawback in this act? Is, see, the scriptures have no restriction. They don't complain if you want to go behind the world and acquire. And you and I would have no objection if somebody running behind the world, if somebody is materialistic and sensual. Why not? That's what you are. That's what your interests are. Perhaps some have led a life of materiality, wanted name and power and wealth in your lives, perhaps early stages of your life, and now you understand the futility of it. Very much possible. But is there anything wrong in seeking wealth? I would say there's nothing wrong in seeking wealth. There's absolutely nothing wrong. The scriptures or shastras have no complaint with that. But what is the complaint is when you adopt spirituality as a means to acquire wealth. That is what is being objectified, or rather it is being objected. You are objectifying religion now. This is the right usage of the word. People are objectifying religion, which is what the Shastras and the text in particular here is objecting to. You use religion as a means to gratify and satisfy your own personal ends. When religion is meant to checkmate or eradicate or get rid of your selfish desires, you are using it to get that. That is a complete mockery of spirituality. You want something, go royally and get it, go royally and enjoy it. Why do you have to put on a garb and abuse it? See, the problem is, when people put on a garb, there are certain norms, there are certain criteria, there are certain restrictions, there is certain taboo. So when people put on this garb, they are expected to be at a certain level, because that's what the garb expects, that's what the garb requires. But mentally, they are not at that level. So there is actually a disparity with their mental maturity vis-a-vis the status that they have adopted by merely putting on a garb or adopting a particular lifestyle. Example here, a lifestyle of a sannyasi. You may be very sincere, you want to adopt, but the problem is, it is way beyond your capacity. So you are not able to do justice to the robe that you have garbed. In fact, I'm sure history has been stained as far as this aspect is concerned. And if your memory serves you well, in the recent past, you would have heard of the atrocities being done by people at churches, especially in the Western countries. Are you all aware of that? Sheer gross atrocities. And there was the media coverage. In fact, even the what do you call them? The Pope. The Pope had come out in open apologizing to people for betraying the faith people had bestowed on this system. And it's a lot for a Pope to come out and say that. And there was this term, they were called as predator priests. You understand what that means? Predator priests. Predators. Sathuraman Garu, what do you make of this word predator priests? Could you get the word? What I was intending to say?
With animal instincts.
Sorry, sir?
Predators. Animal instincts. Like
animalistic instincts. And as Somyama has said, they had gone up animalistic instincts, ready to devour anyone who comes in their contact in their way. They went about abusing, preying people, destroying, stooping to the very grossest level. Now, it is so. See, when you adopt this path, it takes a lot to uphold it. It takes a lot to uphold it. You need, obviously, one grows in the spiritual journey. It's a journey. None of us are at that state of enlightenment. But with a little wisdom, what we understand, even if you look at Shastras, there are 2 points I'm going to make in the same understanding. See, the most important point is materiality is a byproduct of spirituality. I remember hearing it somewhere, very strong message it conveys. Materiality is the byproduct of spirituality. Byproduct means it is almost a scrap. Prosperity is a byproduct of leading a spiritual life. So if you put men of knowledge, men of wisdom and men of power, who is more superior? Rajima, you bring the mightiest powerful man on earth, men of power and men of wisdom. Who is superior?
Undoubtedly, men of wisdom, Guruji.
How are you so sure, ma? I like your conviction, Can you explain yourself? How do you say that men of wisdom are superior to men of knowledge? Men of wisdom are superior to men of power. Sorry.
Because the basic purpose of life is self-realization, and men of wisdom are on the path of self-realization.
How does that make superior? For a person who is behind power, he thinks he is very powerful. And he thinks that is the most important thing in life. Interesting question. In fact, you could use this for the purpose we are intending. How do you say that men of wisdom are superior to men of power? Yeah, Jayama.
Hariom Guruji, power corrupts and corrupts absolutely. And wisdom is nowhere near that sort of a, attribute. Wisdom is permanent, it is superior, it is sattvic, it is noble. But power is for gaining something materialistic.
Yeah, very well said, Jayama. Okay. Yeah, Rajima.
Power can be gone in less than a fraction of a second, but wisdom nobody can take away from you, Guruji.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Nobody can take away one's wisdom. And in fact, the more you give, the richer you get. The more you part with your wisdom doesn't get any less. It only expands, isn't it? Yeah? Wisdom can buy power, but power cannot buy wisdom. Yeah. Powerful words, I don't know, of Vijaya or Appa. Whose words are they? Appa's words or Vijaya's words? oh my God, I didn't know Vijaya was, all my knowledge comes from where you know, but at times I am also blown away, Now, in fact, if there is any proof to that, even in the Puranic times, the king, if he had to have an audience of a Swami or a learned person, he would never ever send someone to summon him or bring him to the palace. He would get down off his throne, he would take an entourage, he would go to wherever the Swami was living to have his audience. So in history itself proves that men of power always sought men of wisdom. Men of wisdom never sought men of power. Kings used to go to sages. Sages never used to come to the kings. It was never that way. So a man of wisdom truly understands the value of materiality and what materiality can give. So in that sense, they say materiality is a byproduct of spirituality. It's a byproduct. There's a beautiful story of a young prince who grew listening to his father about the greatness of great spiritual men and their wisdom. And as time passed, his father passed away, he became the king. But there was this one desire. He could get everything from his father, but he never had opportunity of having a darshan of a Swami, of a man, learned person. So he summoned his few core people and he said, I desire to have an audience with a man of wisdom. And he said, I give you 1 week time. Tell me where such a person is. I would like to go and seek his surrender. I want to learn something from him. I've heard a lot from my father. I've never had that opportunity. So these people went out in search, but they were not serious because these people were servants of the king, his father. They were very senior in the ministry. And this boy, young prince, they didn't take him that seriously. So 2 weeks passed, 3 weeks passed, the prince called these guys and said, hey, I told you all to look out for that Swami. I have no update from you all. What's going on? I am actually very serious. And over the weekend, if you don't get me one, you all will be sacked. So he gave them a strict warning. And the weekend was just a few days from then. So these guys tightened their belts and really started searching for a Swami. And to their bad luck, they couldn't find anyone worthy where the king or the prince could come to seek his audience. So one of them came up with an idea. They got hold of a fellow and got into a contract with him. They told him that you will be given a substantial amount of gold, in fact a bag of gold. He was actually a beggar. He was literally jobless, sitting under a tree begging. So if they picked him up, they thought he will be worthy of putting on an act. They said, we come from the palace. They were well presentable. So they thought these fellows are coming to pick him up. He said, no, don't worry. We have a job for you. Oh, he was very excited. But it's only a temporary job. But whatever job, we'll give you a bag of gold. You have to put on an act as a Swami. Okay, he said, acting is no problem for me. They said, we will do everything. We will deck you up. We will give you a place to be seated. We will tell you when the prince and the entourage and the queen, everybody is going to come to seek your audience. All you got to do is make sure, this is the condition. All you got to do is when the prince comes, obviously he is going to bring something as an offering. When he offers anything to you, you must politely reject it. You should not accept anything that the prince gives. If you fall a prey to what is being offered, he might offer food, he might offer clothing, he might offer jewelry, he might offer many things to you. That is his greatness and respect for men of knowledge. But you should not receive anything. If you receive it, you will not get that, you will not get the bag of gold, we will reveal you, rest of your life will be in prison. He said, okay. No, I will not take. So that guy was decked up, he was sitting under a tree, like a Swami, beard, Namam, Bhaukruta Vesha, all this robes were all put on, and the fellow was ready a few days. And then the appointed time came, the king and the entourage came, and as expected, first thing when the king came, he fell at the feet of the master. The queen fell at the feet of the master. Everybody fell except the minister who was in charge of this. He was standing and watching this whole drama going on. So the king was very annoyed at the arrogance of the elder minister. The king looked at the minister. What happened? The minister also had to prostrate to this whom? Fake Swami, he only put him there. So the minister also had to prostrate. So all the thing he offered, all that drama happened, and the minister's mouth was in his heart. This fellow, hope he doesn't fall a temptation to all these goodies and things, he doesn't accept it. Luckily this fellow did what a wonderful acting. Everybody was impressed, even the minister was impressed. How beautiful this fellow acted as a Swami. And the entire entourage came, and the prince was very pleased that he had so fortunate to have a darshan of a man of his knowledge in the vicinity of the kingdom. He said, Swami, anytime you need anything, please let me know. I'm always available to serve you. So he took his leave with great respect. The entourage left, the minister also left, and after everything got cleared, the minister came running back because he had to acknowledge his contract, the bag of gold. He comes with a bag of gold and he gives to the Swami or the fake Swami. To his surprise, he was still sitting under a tree in that position. He just took his seat and he alerted the beggar, the fake Swami, and says, man, you did wonderful acting. I must tell you, congratulate you, you will become one day a very good actor. As per my agreement, I want to give this bag of gold and settle the score. I don't know who you are, you don't know who I am, you do what you want with your gold, this money is yours. Do you want to get rid of all that? He didn't want to get into trouble. So when he was giving the bag of gold, you know what the beggar said? Take it away, take it away. I don't want it, he said. Keep it, keep your bag of gold, he said. For a moment, the minister got shocked. Said, my dear, you remember who am I? You remember understanding that the drama is finished, you have done your job, this is the contract, take your bag of gold and let's finish our contract here and now. Then the story goes, he didn't take it. And then that fake Swami, the beggar, told the minister to sit down. And he said these words. And he said, by merely putting on a robe, by merely enacting to be a Swami, I had the king at my feet, I had the princess at my feet, I had wealth, food, clothing, I had you at my feet. By merely putting on a garb of spirituality, if I truly become a Swami, what will I not get? That moment he realized what is to be a man of spiritual wisdom. And that's when the minister truly prostrated to his extraordinary wisdom. And he said, Man, you taught me a great lesson today. Now, why such a long story? It's just to establish the point, materiality is a byproduct of spirituality. So if a spiritual man abuses the garb for a scrap byproduct, it is abuse of outward symbols. Please realize this, and this is happening majority. But you and I wouldn't know which is chalk, which is cheese. It is not for us to find out which is chalk, which is cheese, because you will start sitting in judgment. Don't judge, but you got to have your own assessment. You got to assess people. Don't be blown away by the mere outward charms. Don't be blown away by mere parading of garments. Just because somebody puts on a garments and parades himself, don't fall for those parade. Now, as I've said, you may say, oh, thank God I don't belong to this category. But this is not limited or restricted to spiritual field alone. Now, this is very much relevant to anyone who puts on a garb. Any garb for that matter. The question is, when you put on the garb, are you living up to the ideals of what the garb represents? For example, you could be a lawyer, you could be a doctor, you could be a government servant, you could put on any robe which comes with a certain responsibility, it comes with a certain accountability to your job. For what purpose are you putting on the robe? Are you doing it to satisfy your own selfish ends, or are you doing it with the purpose to serve the objective, what it is meant to? So I can abuse my garb, my role, my responsibility, or I serve it and use it for the right purposes. So you should never ever do something to merely satisfy your personal appetite. In fact, you should feel uncomfortable to receive anything. Uncomfortable. Because it is not a trade, isn't it? There's no trade going on here. I give you this, you give me that. It should never happen in that spirit. So when the teacher gives in true spirit of service and sacrifice, there is no, whenever you talk in terms of spirit of service and sacrifice, there is no expectation. And you must try to appreciate that. There is no expectation. But at the same time, the shishya or the receiver should not take that for granted. So the shishya or the receiver should be grateful for what is given. But the guru, in fact, it is a very again misunderstood concept. In the, if I'm not wrong, in the 3rd chapter, he says, the guru says, the shishya, Krishna is saying in the 3rd chapter that the shishya, the student must serve the guru. Literally, directly says, you must serve me. So when the guru tells the shishya to serve him, you must never have runa to anyone. You must never be indebted to anyone. And if at all, the worst of all that is to be indebted to a spiritual guru. That's the worst of all. You must never be indebted to a spiritual person. But why does the guru tell a student to serve him? Not that the guru has any expectation in mind, but if the guru tells the student to serve him, what is the objective? What's the reason? Enna Amar, are you there? Following?
Yes, Guruji, I can hear.
Okay. So, why does the Guru tell the student to serve him? Literally serve him is what the direct statement.
Maybe what I feel like, serve him in the sense, maybe people understood like a material way, maybe to help the knowledge to other people, or to other people, when I feel like, to other society. That could be the reason. Not serve him means not materially, because I've seen some people like, Guru means like, they'll fall on the things, everything, but misunderstood of the concept of serving the Guru.
See, I understand if you put it broadly. The literal, in fact, if you go to the verse reference, he says, the Guru tells the Shishya to serve him first.
Yeah, I think what I understood, then.
See, you may go and serve the world, but if you don't,
No,
yeah.
that reverence should be there to take. Actually,
Yeah,
we
go
should
ahead.
have that reverence whenever we are going to the people. Like knowledge is always given, taken. It's not given. Like so, that's the reason. When I'm interested of something, I need to know. So with the reverence, I have to approach you, sir. I did not understand this. So could you please explain? So this is, I understood like in this sense.
No, you're right. No, you're not wrong at all. You're very, very correct. You must approach the Guru with utter reverence, and you must not take it for granted. Knowledge is always taken, you're right, but the observation why a student is being told to serve the Guru is if the student receives the knowledge, and if he is not grateful for what he received. Now, here we are not trying to condition or qualify in what way the Guru or the student is grateful to the Guru. It's not being qualified. The objective is you must serve the Guru. Amar, in the olden days, in fact, I have mentioned it on and off here and there, when a student goes in search of a Guru and he finds someone sitting deep in the woods all by himself near a small hut, sitting under a tree meditating. That's what they were lost in that solitude in the woods. And when the student goes to the master, the student goes and asks him, Master, please, I want to learn this Atma Vidya. As you said, you approach with great reverence. You want to learn. The master says, you ask me question after 2 months. I will not answer now. You ask me after 2 months, I'll answer. Then what the student will do? Okay, anyway, this man is not going to answer me. The student is not that he'll go in search of another Guru, or he says, okay, anyway the Guru is little busy doing nothing, but still he doesn't want to answer me. I might just go spend some time on a holiday, go Europe tour and come back and I'll ask the question. It's not that. The student sat at the feet of the Lord, whatever seva that man needed. If he needed wood to put fire, he would cook him, he would wash his clothes, he would bring water for him from the river, whatever help he needed, he was there with the master, unasked for, he on his own served the Guru. And after 2 months, with same reverence, he asked the Guru, my Lord, can you please tell me what the truth is? Where to find it? How to go about it? And then the Guru has very certainly verified and the student has passed the test that here is a student who is an adhikari, who is worthy of receiving. They don't want to waste their knowledge to those who are unworthy of receiving. So when a guru, now if you mark that example, the guru did not tell the student to serve him, but that was the caliber of the student. But when the guru tells the student to serve, is only for the benefit of the student, because if the student is not grateful to the guru, he is being selfish. So the very knowledge he has received is not going to serve him alone spiritually. So these are all the preliminary prerequisites for a student even before he receives the knowledge. Now, but there are people who are actually abusing this culture, and that is what this verse is trying to highlight. Abuse of outward symbols. So these are spiritual hypocrites who take spiritual practice just for the sake of the belly, as the verse has said. They are pseudo-sannyasis, false renunciates. They are impersonators who adopt weird practices to put on a show of religiosity. Now, even in our own culture, we did take reference of the extreme example of churches in predator priests, I've said. In our own culture, when you go to a temple, how many of, as I've not experienced it, the pujaris, if you can slip in a 100 rupee note or a 500 rupee note, the puja becomes suddenly very special for you. Now, I'm not sitting here in criticism, please. I'm only trying to convey what the verse is saying. I have nothing against anyone or any culture. It is just an observation. Now, I remember experiencing it. You slip in a 100 rupee note, where? To the guy who is distributing prasad, where? Can you guess my mind? Can you read my mind? Any ordinary temple people do, I understand. That fellow, Chepan sir, Siddharaman garu.
Abusing, same, Tirupati.
So, right at
Sir, Guru,
Chepan sir.
I just
Chepan sir.
You were talking about serving Guru in the recent past. Yesudas, when he wanted to learn Carnatic music, he went to legendary Chembainath Vaidyanath Bhagavatar, who is an Orthodox Brahmin, and he wanted to learn from him. And he was in his cattle shed for a few months before commencing his classes, and he stayed in their house and learned.
Who is that?
How
Sorry.
he learned Carnatic music.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Yesudas.
Singer Yesudas.
Yesudas, who is Christian, wanted to learn Carnatic music from the
Right.
number one
Yeah.
legendary Chembai Vaidyanatha Bhagavatar of Kerala. He was the number one musician those days. So he went to his house and he stayed back till he said yes in the cattle shed and serving his cattle. And then he was in.
Amazing.
That's how he
Very
learned.
true.
And it's a true
These
story.
are all the true characteristics, and then this speaks volume of the Guru and the Shishya. So, looks like Siddharaman Garu and Rajima, you have got that art of reading my mind. I got to be a little more careful now. So the example I was talking about is not an ordinary temple down the road, right in Tirumala Tirupati, where you consider it the most heavenly place, the most divine place. Very true, it is very divinely. But you find There are people sitting right out there. They will use power, they will use their influence, they will use money just to get the darshan of the Lord, and people are ready to fall a prey to it. What a pity, what a pity. You slip in at a little more, then you will get substantial pongal which you can have for breakfast. You can have pongal, that shakar pongala or bella pongala. That will give you in a small doppa you call it, isn't it? He'll give you a small thing. But you want that not just in the palm, you want to have in a big basket. The big basket is not going to give you, but he will give you, provided donne. It's called in Tamil donne. I think in Telugu it's called doppa. Correct, Vijaya? I can't hear you, Vijaya. Doppa. Okay. I got it right because my Telugu is very rudimentary. So I don't want to pronounce it wrongly, you see. So you got it. So if you look around, there are plenty of such people who fall under this category. So what you got to understand is never ever abuse your outward spirituality through outward acts. So it is a holy act. Don't allow it to be polluted with an unholy thought. So the moment a holy act is stained with an unholy thought, it destroys it all. It is just like a drop of lime in milk. It destroys it all. Not easy, but this verse talks about spiritual hypocrites. Alright? At least this verse gives us an idea of what not to do. Alright? Verse 15. Angam galitam halitam mundam dashana vihinam jatam tundam Vruddho yati grihitva dandam tadapi na munchati ashapindam angam galitam halitam mundam dashana vihinam jatam tundam vruddho yati grihitva dandam tadapi na munchati Pindam. Now what you got to take a note is verses 15, 16 and 17. Verses 15, 16 and 17, he's talking about a person who is very genuine. He's a very genuine spiritual practitioner, but he goes about it in a wrong way. He doesn't know the right spiritual path. The 14th fellow is a hypocrite. He is fooling himself, fooling the world. 15, 16, 17, he is very genuine, but he is going about it in a wrong way. Verse 18, he is a very genuine person, and he goes about it in the right way. This is the flow of thought. 14, hypocrite. 15, 16, 17, he is genuine but doesn't know how to go about it. He makes an error, wrong path. Verse 18, genuine fellow goes about it in the right way. Okay? Now the words may be repeated in the few verses, so get the gist of it. Okay? Now here the translation reads, the body has been worn out, angam, galitam, halitam mundam. Head turned grey, mouth has gone toothless. With the support of staff, the old man moves about. Adapini munchati asha pindam. Yet the bundle of desires leaves not. So, what do you gather from the description? The body has worn out, head turned grey, mouth has gone toothless. He is just moving about with a staff in his hand. Yet the bundle of desires leaves not. The implication from this verse is the description indicates that here is a person who has led a very indulgent life. A very, very indulgent life. He has burnt his body through indulgence. He has let his senses go all out. But why has he gone about indulging? Jayama? Are you there, Jayama? Okay, Rajima, can you tell me why has this person led an indulgent life?
He's a very worldly person who is chasing his desires all the time without having any other goal in his life. Ego and egocentric desires played a very important part of his, or played the only part in his life.
Now, I think you haven't got the message. A little before this explanation, what did I say, ma? In fact, not just you, Sudhakar Garu also said, chasing sensual desires. Chitraman Garu said he's chasing his vasanas. No. It is wrong. We do not say verses 15, 16, 17 talks about a very genuine spiritual practitioner. We are not talking of a worldly sensual person. 15, 16, 17 talks of a genuine spiritual practitioner, but he goes about it in a wrong way. His objective is to get rid of his desires. But he has gone about it in a wrong approach. He has wrongly approached spirituality, his influence of ideas, because there are certain thinkers who say one way to get rid of desires is go all out. Experience it, man. You want to experience something, why are you holding it in your heart and burning yourself with that craving and wanting and not fulfilling it? Go all out. Go out, plunge into it, experience it, exhaust it, and get done with it. So their school of thought is experience is the means to exhaust desires. Indulgence is the means to get rid of desires. And you know who was one of them who was very well known, who propounded this school of thought? Rajima? Okay. Oh my God, I need to do a little more homework and start asking difficult questions. The questions are now becoming very, very easier. That's the way I know that the audience or the students are becoming very sharp. Correct, Gayatri ma. Even before I finished the question, she had the answer. You are very right, Gayatri ma. Osho, famously known Rajneesh. Have any one of you been to the ashram? Anywhere near the vicinity of ashram? Harishji? But what have you heard about him? You know what was Rajneesh famous for? Gayatri? He became very famous for what? Oh, one of the things made him very famous. Very much. That's what his school of thought is. You indulge in sensual pleasures means you whatever want, experience it, and then you get rid of it. You exhaust it. Yeah, he is the one who started transcendental meditation, TM. I know people. I don't want to say that. No, man. I'd rather be careful what I say. But you know what Rajneesh was one of the things famous for? He was known because he had 108 Rolls Royce. Yeah, correct. I thought transcendental meditation is Mahesh Yogi. He is not Rajneesh. Something told me it is not right. TM is Mahesh Yogi, but one of the things Rajneesh was well known for, 108 Rolls Royce he had. Not 1 and 2, huh? But also he wanted holy figure, 108. And Amma, Rajamma, 108 questions we wanted to put. 108 Rolls Royce he went. Now, if you had, in fact, our ashram where I studied was not far from Pune. So, I have never gone into the ashram, but we used to pass by the ashram, Rajneesh ashram, for the work and things. And I have seen people wearing robes, the ochre robes, 95% or 90 odd percent were all Westerners. Well, he was very famous, as you know, his history was very famous in the West. And they're sitting outside in the cafeterias and all over you see them smoking and drinking. It's very common. And if you have to enter the ashram, one of the tests you have to go through is AIDS test. Do you know that? If you have to visit the ashram, those days, I'm talking in my early 90s when I was in the ashram, but his ashram was much before. So people, these are the things, you have to go through many tests. One of the tests is this. So his concept is expression. If you have anger at someone, don't try to contain it and conquer it. Give it a vent. Express it. So there were rooms in the ashram. Let's say two people had some bitterness, some hatred, some animosity, some difference, and they're not able to let go. So what they would have done, they would actually let them into the room, all by themselves, empty room, and they will start fighting with each other. They're given half an hour. You start fighting with each other, they'll start pulling their hair, they'll tear themselves, tear their clothes. Even sometimes they come to an extent where they start breaking a few teeth, the bone, and then later someone will go and help both to come out. So this was his approach. Whether be it any desire, whether you have the urge for sex, you can have all the license to satisfy. You want urge to smoke, you can smoke. Go to full extent. Get rid of it. And some of us are actually experiencing it now. Now, what we are experiencing now, what is the season now? The season is of mangoes. 10 months, 9 months, no mango in the market. And suddenly, even in spite of lockdown, we are flooded, the market is flooded with mangoes. So you will have mango pickle, you will have mango ice cream, mango dessert, mango fruit, mango juice, mango ampanna juice, mango everywhere. So what will happen after 2 weeks into the mango, the ladies in the house will want, I tell you, you buy mango and come, I am going to give you a whack. I have got so many warnings already by Vijaya. So whenever I step out, if at all, she says, I tell you, you don't bring any mangoes into the house. Because there's so many already there lying in the house. I said, yes, Amma, I will not make the mistake, Now, so even if the mango there, you ask, is there any other fruit in the house? Even a banana is okay. Banana, which is such a common fruit, you don't mind having banana as a alternative. Now what happens? The fact that you have become indulgent, you indulge in a mango in any form, whether be it a dessert or whether fruit, whether be a juice or a lassi or a cut fruit, whatever it is, that fruit which you had a longing for, you waited so much for the season to arrive, having arrived, you indulge in it with freedom, you get saturated, you say, no, I don't want it, I'm fine. And this is the principle exactly. Rajneesh was one of them who propounded that indulgence is one of the ways to get rid of the desires. Now I ask you all, does that work? Harishji? Does indulgence get rid of the desires?
In my opinion.
Oh my God, Gayatri and all is very confident.
In my opinion, it doesn't.
Yeah, Tata?
In my opinion, it doesn't. It only you.
In your opinion, it doesn't. What happens then? Anna Hariji, waiting for your comment, sir. Soumyama says no, Seth Ramangaru says no. Vasanti says yes, sir. Anna Vasanti, you're the only one against the flow. Watch out. Rajima says it binds you. Gayatri Ma says we crave for more after a gap. Very true. Lakshmi Ma says desire for mangoes will come next year again. That is for guarantee. Fear of social stigma. What do you mean by that, sir? Temporary diminishing returns. Anna Hariji, now we have to tempt you to say something now. சொல்லுங்க சார், பேசுங்க.
No, I wrote that desires beget desires.
சார் அவ்வளோ பெரிய வார்த்தைலாம் தெரியாது சார். பிகெட் அதெல்லாம் நம்ம டிக்ஷனரி பார்க்கணும். நீங்க எக்ஸ்பிளைன் பண்ணீங்க நல்லா இருக்கும்.
It is a question of, I don't know, it's getting unnecessarily, I'm probably getting into deep philosophy, which I'm not good at or not capable of. But if the entire objective or entire identification is with only the set of desires in the external, then it is unlikely that you will ever turn inwards to the ultimate. And therefore, you may not be in the right path.
You're very right there, Hariji, but does indulgence get rid of the desires?
Because all these are at the external level, whereas you are talking of something which is internal, which you want to achieve. So in the external world, you are saying that the logic is that in the external world you won't find the solutions to the internal.
Okay, if that be true, so therefore external indulgence also should have no effect on internal state of mind, isn't it? going by your argument that something external can't influence internal, which is even to seek the self, even in the same way, the external indulgences will have no effect on the state of your mind. It has no effect on the state of your desires. So how should it matter? I'm just being a critic. I'm just trying to get the deeper aspect of it.
I don't know, I'm probably wrongly quoting from Guruji in Kathopanishad, where he says that the external is also a manifestation of the Brahman. And therefore, that I think answers this. Even the sense objects.
So external.
Even the.
Okay.
I'm forgetting now the exact word that he used, but to the extent that all the sense objects, everything, even the senses are controlled by the mind.
Yes, senses are controlled by the mind. Yes.
Only get their form or get them, they be what they are because of the mind. It's like the cause and effect.
Yes.
And therefore,
yes,
there will be, when you say that the senses are, there's something at the senses level, it is only because there is something at the mental level.
Fair enough. Yeah. I get what you're saying.
Of course, purely.
Yes, Ji.
Purely probably mistaken understanding out of context of the Kathopanishad.
No. What you said is quite apt. But as everybody has conveyed, and what we need to understand is indulgence does not get rid of desires. Rather, indulgence creates a sense of suffocation, only temporary, a sense of saturation, only temporary. But the underlying desire, in fact, is not eliminated. The desire still lurks. Furthermore, the indulgence has actually strengthened your desire. It has fortified your desire. But people go by the immediate effect of a feeling of saturation to elimination of desire. It is something like a desire which goes into an unmanifest form in the form of vasana. Like when the season ends, have you got rid of the desire for mango? No, the desire for mango is very much there. It is just dormant. The moment mango comes, the desire wakes up. As they say, it's called, what do you call? A frost-bitten snake. If a snake is frost-bitten, it appears to be dead. In fact, as kids, you can even go and play with the snake. It appears dead because it is frost-bitten. But the moment the first rays of light falls on it, and as it gathers heat, it wakes up and starts hissing. And that's what desires are. So don't be fooled when desires fall into this frost-bitten state because the objects of desire are not available, or you have got saturated with sense objects. There could be a couple of reasons. The desire object is not available, or you have overfed the objects so you get saturated. At that point, the desire gets into an unmanifest state of vasana. It's a frost-bitten state. But the vasanas of desires, tadapini munchati ashapindam, yet the mass of desires leaves not. So what we got to understand is that indulgent life does not get rid of its desires, rather it goes about creating and strengthening and multiplying more desires. Alright? So keep this in mind, and the thought flow from verses 14 to 18. Alright? Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om.
Namaha Hari Om.